Okay, so this is just an overview on SolidWorks, how to create a file, sketches, which are kind of like the backbone that everything is built out of in SolidWorks. Again, sketches are very similar to, the most similar program I can compare it to would be like Adobe Illustrator because it's working with lines and things like that, and vertices, vertex. So looking at SolidWorks, you might all see something like this. If you go to File, New, chances are this is the defaults. So these are the three types of SolidWorks files. There's a part, an assembly, and a drawing. A part is the most typical file, and for now it's really the only thing you need to worry about. There is a drawing requirement for Project 1, but without the syllabus on hand, I think we get to that a week from today on Wednesday. Assemblies we get into in Project 2. In assembly, the analogy that I've made on the handout is you want to think of it like an InDesign file. So it's kind of like a file that points to different part files. You kind of like use all the parts to make one big object. And again, that's more for Project 2. If you want to use my templates, which again, the main difference is just the lighting setup. If you go to Advanced, if you went through the steps on the setup to get that file to be correct, that like adding new file location, you should be able to see it as a tab on the top, whatever the folder name is. So it might say downloads, it might say template test. And you should see the two templates here, in which case, in this instance, we just want part W. You can click on that and go ahead and click OK, or you can double click. I believe that works as well. I need to figure out what this is. This always pops up on my computer. It probably won't happen for you all. Okay. So this is what SolidWorks looks like. You have commands at the top. And in fact, I believe here, I will mess with this later. At some point, I changed this to be larger. Whoops, no, never mind. I'll clear that in a minute. So at the top here, you see your commands. So again, if you remember the first day, we talked about features. Features are like extrude. They often come in pairs. So this is called the command manager up here. You see the different commands that you can apply to a sketch. Again, Project 1 is mainly focused on sketches because this is what everything is built off of. So if you click on the Sketch tab, you'll see these different sketch options up here. Surfaces and surfacing is more advanced. We'll get into this later in the class, but it's possible to do the whole class without surfaces. Surfaces are more similar to Rhino. If I understand correctly, Rhino is mainly done in surfaces or all done in surfaces. But for the most part, again, Project 1, you'll be using sketches and features. Okay. So to create a new sketch, you want to select this. Before I get there, on the left here, this is what's called the model tree. So this is the tree of, as you build things, the commands will be added here, kind of like a Photoshop history. This is the analogy we made on the first day of class with the Jenga tower. This is where you build your Jenga tower, top to bottom. So to create a sketch, you need to create the sketch on a piece of paper, right? Again, as an analogy. The default planes given to you are front, top, and right. So this is what you have. To navigate in SolidWorks, you can see I just highlighted these and then spin them around. You can see in the bottom left of my screen here, it shows you what I'm doing in terms of clicking and on the mouse and on the keyboard. So if you hold down, if you have a mouse with a click wheel, if you hold the click wheel down or the center button down, that's how you rotate the object in SolidWorks. If you wheel in, you can zoom in and zoom out with the wheel. So right now I'm rolling my wheel away from me, and now I'm rolling it towards me. That's how you can zoom in and out. There's also some navigation tools up here, but that's typically what I use, is the middle wheel of the mouse. Okay. So to create a sketch, you want to pick one of the planes. In this instance, I'm going to pick the front plane. It typically doesn't matter which plane you use. Depending on what you end up doing, everyone has their own preference. If you end up working at a firm or a place, they may have a default that they use. But I've found different preferences for different people. But for example, like if you're building like a water bottle, you might build it, you might use a top plane for the top view profile of that water bottle. So for today's demo, at the bottom, there's like a little bit of a worksheet to work through. It's to create those shapes. I realize I'm kind of jumping over the middle here, so sorry for the recording's sake. So eventually, this is what we're working towards, is to get you all to create these shapes, kind of as a basic intro. But in order to create those, you kind of need this information in the middle. So we'll cover that. So to create a sketch, you can go to the front plane, select the piece of paper you want to sketch on, and you can either click the sketch icon, or you can click Alt-S or Option-S, and that will default to opening a sketch. So please, everyone, pay attention. This is one of the most confusing things about SolidWorks, and I have found that students have struggled with in the past. I am now inside of a sketch, okay? I really wish that SolidWorks did something a little bit more visually different to really let you know that you are what I'm calling sketch world, inside sketch world. The only thing it has to show you that you're in a sketch is a couple things. This up here, and then the color of the sketch itself. So to just give you a quick example, if I select the corner rectangle tool, or again, if you have my hotkeys and just hit the letter R, I can now draw a rectangle. This thing in the middle is the origin. If I click on it, it creates the rectangle with one corner on there. If I hit escape, right now you can see my cursor, it's still in the rectangle tool. If I hit escape, I get away from that. So right now the sketch is black and blue and has this shaded in. This is how I know I'm inside the sketch, because it has color to it. If I exit the sketch by either hitting this or simply hitting Alt-S or Option-S again, now the sketch is gray. So I'm now outside of sketch world. So it's, again, I found, this is what I'm saying is very important, I have found that it's confusing for students to know whether they're in the sketch or out of the sketch. And the way you know that is by the sketch's color, or by glancing to the top right of your viewing window here to see if there is the sketch icon. Again, that's one of my knocks on SolidWorks. I wish it was a little more clear. Does that make sense to everybody? The analogy I used last time is kind of like Stranger Things. You have the regular world, that's when you're building objects. Then you have the upside down, that's sketch world. When you're in the upside down, you can edit sketches and stuff. It's not a perfect analogy, but then those get used for the features later on. So to edit the sketch, you can simply right-click on it in the feature tree and click on Edit Sketch, or you can select it again and hit Alt-S, and it'll bring you back into this editing the sketch. So, okay, for the sake of repetition, if I delete this. So, okay, so right now, again, I'm in regular mode. If I want to create a sketch, I select a plane, and then I either click this or hit Alt-S. And now this appears, we're inside sketch mode. Okay, so the very first object that the sheet asks you to create is a square. And I guess, again, we'll use this as a tool to talk about things. So, again, there's different sketch tools to make different shapes. Here are some basic ones, right? A line, an arc, a circle, a rectangle, and then dimensioning. These are all critical. The other critical aspect, and probably the most important thing of sketches to be aware of, is the origin, okay, which is marked by this icon here, and it's this in the center. It also happens to be where all of these planes intersect. Without the origin, nothing is anchored. The origin is kind of like the 0 point that everything is attached to, which is incredibly important for having a robust Jenga tower. So again, if we're creating any shape, it's helpful to at least either attach a corner to the origin, or more typical workflow is to have the origin be in the center. But for today, as an intro, it's asking you to create a square with one of the corners on the origin. So the way you can do that is either find this rectangle tool or click R, and simply by clicking on the origin, if you hover over it, there should be a red or orange dot that appears on there. By clicking on that and dragging, right, I'm just moving my mouse around now, wherever I click is where this rectangle is going to end. Again, if I don't hit escape, I can just keep drawing rectangles. That's how this works, okay? But to stop, you hit escape. This is where the max and the delete key is kind of frustrating, because to delete this, I can drag and select and hit delete. I believe you can drag and select and right-click or command-click and hit delete if you're not set up yet on your Mac. Now, let's talk about colors a little bit more. A black line means that it is defined. There is a rule that is controlling it. So in this instance, these two black lines have two rules defining it. One, they're attached to the origin. Two, if I click on the line, in fact, it will tell me on the side here, it's vertical, okay? So those are the two rules that are commanding this line, and that's what is making the line appear black, because it is defined. This bottom line is also defined. It is defined by being attached to the origin and being horizontal. The end of the line, however, is blue. That means it can drag and be manipulated. Both these lines are completely blue. That means that nothing is controlling them, okay? On the sheet, what's listed here, these are rules that can control sketches and lines. So these are different options that appear when you select a line, and I'll show you that in SolidWorks. So if I select this line here, you can see that these are my options currently for this line. You can see it's already being told to be horizontal. If I tell the line to be vertical, it's going to give me an error. The line appears red. It has two rules telling it to be two different things. It doesn't know what to do. That's where you get a red color. So again, that's kind of what this is all explaining here, is what the different colors mean in the sketch. So obviously we don't want it to be that. Now if we want this to be a square, what's a rule that we might want to apply to this shape? To be equal, right. So what we might do is we might select and what to be equal. Horizontal and vertical to be equal. So what you might do is you might select the top line and a vertical line. So I'm holding shift now. So I select both of them. And now you can see these different relations. I can tell them to be parallel. I can tell them to be perpendicular. But what we want is equal. So now we have a square. No matter how I drag this, it's always going to be a square. Because now we've just introduced a new rule to the sketch. And you can see when I click on this line, do you see this little equal sign? And this one down here? These are the rules that are commanding this line. You also see this single dash that looks like a subtraction symbol. That's because it's saying, hey, this is being told to be horizontal. Because we created this with the rectangle tool, that's why the horizontal rule and the vertical rule are kind of embedded into the shape we created. If you create a line on its own, it's going to have absolutely no rules. If I select this, you'll see the relationships. There's nothing here. It's a lonely single line. If you drag it, you can drag it around. It's fully defined. Okay. So we have now defined this into a square. If we add a dimension to it, so here's a smart dimension. You can either click on this or hit D, as in dog or dimension, and simply select a line and drag this off to the side. You can hit 2 to make it a 2 by 2 inch square. You now have a fully defined square, and that is the first shape that this asks you to make. The reason for this, I realize this isn't dry, and I apologize. I promise I will make this class as interesting as I can, but the beginning is really just kind of baby steps, okay? The reason this is important is you have to know how to, there's a couple very important things here. One, attaching to the origin. If I create a box here and do the exact same steps, I'll select both of these lines and make them equal. I'll define this to be 2 inches, so it's 2 by 2. You'll notice the whole box is blue. That's because it's not attached to anything. It's floating in space. The origin is incredibly important. So everything you do needs to be attached to the origin, okay? But here's the beautiful thing. This is how you make a robust Jenga structure. Of course, this is a very basic shape for day one. But if you start to comprehend these rules and set it up properly, you can make and design objects that with just the change of a number, the whole object will rebuild. You can make your water bottle bigger or smaller. That way you can play with the proportion. You can use SolidWorks as a design tool to visually change the proportion and look at the object and make a design call as to whether it looks better or worse based on the changes you made without much work. So here, if I type in a 3, the square just got bigger. But because of the rule we set forth, it always remains a square. If we delete this equal symbol, and now I change this, it's only going to grow up and down. It won't grow as a square. So rules and relationships between sketches are incredibly important. The one line that I forgot to mention is something called construction lines. So if I select this line here, you'll notice under options on the left. So anytime, the way SolidWorks works, anytime you select something, chances are you'll see what the feature options are on the left here. So if I select this line, you can see it brings up the property box. It's just clicking from, it just automatically goes from the feature tree over to the properties. So I clicked on this line. The properties for this line, it gives me some relations that I can give it. So for example, I can make it vertical, and if you watch the yellow line, it's going to snap vertical when I click on this. And now options, I can make it to be for construction, okay? When it's for construction, it gets these dashed lines. Construction lines are useful for just kind of setting something up. So if we go and look at this here, you can see the D uses a construction line in the middle here. The way to think about a construction line is whenever you use the feature, so if I go back to SolidWorks here, I could, for example, take this sketch and make it into a command. I could extrude it. Anything that's a construction line will be ignored by the extrusion. That's another way to think of construction lines. They're literally just used for setting up your sketches, and again, it's just a drawing tool to set up relationships and rules. And again, it comes in handy with certain shapes here, like this D and this B. Okay.